but after what I have just done, I'm going to do the right thing." It was the last time anyone ever heard from him. He disappeared, and his blue Peugeot 205 was never found. Cell site analysis from that last text showed that he'd been in an area near Bewdley Town Football Club, close to the River Severn. So that's where I started looking. I began by surveying the Ordnance Survey map of the area to find any mine shafts, quarries, tunnels or lakes where a car might have stayed hidden for over a year. But the only thing that stuck out was the river. This was a puzzle, because the police were adamant his car was not in the water. They based this assertion on advice from the Environment Agency, who said if Damien's car was in the river, then oil and petrol residue from it would show up on their sensitive monitoring equipment. I was also told that the area of the river had been searched several times with a special sonar device. This immediately sent my spider senses tingling. I'd done enough secondary searches to understand that what police forces sometimes thought was an effective apparatus was usually the opposite. "Who had the sonar that was used?" I asked. I was told it was a voluntary search and rescue organisation. Police forces regularly use voluntary organisations to carry out surface searches of rivers, as their own numbers are greatly depleted, and while these people do a great job and should be commended, the equipment they use is never up to the spec that we have at our disposal. "I can guarantee they used a fish finder," I said. Fish finders do what it says on the tin. They are cheap sonar units that fishermen use to find shoals of fish. They are not good for finding submerged cars or bodies. I called the head of the search and rescue unit, who confirmed that they had used a fish finder on their searches. I thanked them for their input and help. The call confirmed my assumption that the river had not been searched properly, and was the most likely place to find the car and possibly Damien. There were no slipways into the river that he could have driven down, so it was likely he'd driven off the bank. As he had disappeared 18 months previously, any damaged bushes or uprooted vegetation that might have provided a clue as to where he went in had long since regrown. Luckily, there was a weir and a lock downriver from where the cell site analysis suggested he'd been. A floating car or a moving submerged car would not have been able to get through it. This gave us about a mile of river to search. I had my dive team with me, and we got kitted up, worked out a grid, launched the inflatable boat with the SSS, and began the search. Within 15 minutes, I located not one, but 2 cars on the riverbed. One of our divers, Aidan, got in the water and swam down to the first. Visibility was poor, and he felt around the vehicle to locate the number plate, which he removed and brought to the surface. It was not the plate for Damien's car, and when the police who were with us checked it, they discovered it was a car that had been stolen years earlier. The other car we'd found was further up the river and close to the road on a corner. We set up on the bank and used the surface demand diving equipment. This is equipment that provides breathing air to the diver through an umbilical line from the surface, rather than through a tank on their back. The idea was to swim down and take a camera to film the plate, and then identify the vehicle from that. I was the first diver in, rolling off the side of the boat. Chris passed me the underwater camera on a cable that transmitted pictures to a screen on the surface. I descended slowly down the shot line, but could see nothing. The water was filthy. I swam around in the gloom until I touched the roof of the car, then around the car to feel the windows. They were all closed and intact, which suggested that if Damien was in the car when it went in, which was highly likely, he was still in it. I tried to look through the windows, but it was impossible to see anything clearly inside. There was no question of trying to open the doors or smash the windows for 2 reasons. Firstly, the car was a potential crime scene. Although the evidence suggested Damien had taken his own life, we could not be 100% sure until we checked the vehicle, and so I didn't want to disturb the scene any more than was necessary. The second reason was that Damien was probably inside. I didn't know what condition he'd be in, but I'd seen enough bodies in water to know that it wouldn't be good, and I didn't want to open the doors or windows only for bits of him to float away. Having completed the initial reconnaissance, I swam to the surface to brief my team. My colleague Rick took over and went down to get the number plate, which he brought to the surface. It, too, was covered in a layer of algal grime and silt, which was wiped away to reveal the registration that we knew belonged to Damien's car. We'd found him. Once we knew that we had our target, we notified the police, and the next stage of the operation then became recovery, for which a crane was brought in and the road was closed off. This was not something that the public needed to see. In normal circumstances, a car would be lifted horizontally, with chains passed through the windows and under the roof, but we couldn't open the windows as we had to preserve evidence. Rick and Aidan dived and secured the chains around the axles and wheels. Very slowly, the car was lifted to the surface and emerged from the water, back end first. As it rose free, the water inside drained away. Mercifully, it was still impossible to see inside. Out in the daylight, no blue paintwork was visible. The car was mucky brown. Few understand how an object changes appearance underwater in a matter of months, and a visual search may well have dismissed this vehicle, because now it was brown if viewed on an underwater camera from the surface. The case also reinforced one of my work mantras, that you should always question what others tell you. Had I accepted the Environment Agency's declaration that if there was a vehicle in the water, the oil and petrol would have been picked up by their monitors, I would also have discounted the likelihood that the car was in the river.